Hirayang araw po sa inyo lahat. Good day. Today we will discuss something new, but not really something new because this was introduced internationally speaking many decades ago. But in the Philippines, we are reintroducing it because in 1970s it was mentioned, but it was not democratized. So this is about features thinking and foresight as handles in governance and towards sustainable development. So let me share my slide presentation to all of you. And the title of the presentation is The Future We Want, Innovating for Governance and Development. So there are a number of concepts here. The future we want, colon, innovating for governance and development. So we have the future. Later on, we'll discuss the future with an S because we always talk about multiple features and it is open. And another is innovating. Innovating is about innovation, knowledge co-creation, and then governance and development. These are buzzwords that have been introduced many, many decades ago. So with that, I'd like to draw your attention in this slide. And this is about long-termism versus short-termism. As you can see here, Hofstede made a study or conducted a study about the long-term orientation of different countries. Here in the Philippines, we have the so-called short-term orientation because we only got 27% compared to Indonesia, they got 62%, while South Korea 100%. 100% because they have the so-called established anticipatory governance mindset. So the point here is that what are the gaps? What are the problems that we encounter when it comes to um, introducing reforms, innovations, and of course, in crafting policies towards sustainable development. And in planning, likewise, do we push for short-term planning or we are looking at a time horizon like 20 or 30 years? So that's something that we need to look into or delve into. That is why the objectives of this presentation will really look into the basic concepts about future thinking and foresight to support governance and development, to immerse with strategic tools. Basically, these are just a preliminary introduction to the tools and then adapt the principles of future thinking and foresight as wise leader and managers. And of course, explore emerging issues and trends in a VUCA world. And another thing that I'd like to share with you, of course, is the features leadership and governance framework. And this is really about promoting the culture of anticipation, of being an agile and collaborative government. And of course, we need to provide a practical application of the framework to current and future pandemics for making civil servants features ready. So again, the context is about COVID-19, but we're almost in the finish line and we are looking at a brighter future. But by looking at the brighter future, we have to be ready. Likewise, what if the next COVID-19 part two will arise? What are we going to do? So we have to be ready with the disruption, with discontinuity, with disturbance that may affect us in the next couple of years or in the next 5, 10, or 20 years. So the features as we are living in a complex environment is faster than we think. According to Diamandis and Cutler, there are 6 Ds of exponentials. Of course, we're looking at digitalization, deception, disruption, as well as demonetization, dematerialization, and democratization. And these 6 Ds of exponentials really talk about the acceleration of the acceleration, the existential risks that we are facing. So as public managers and leaders, what are we going to do? So we need to have the so-called set of skills and competencies in order for us to really prepare for the future. We may not be able to evade the existential risks, but somehow we'll be able to mitigate the risks or the uncertainties that we might be facing in the next couple of years. Another thing is, of course, the black elephant, the black swan, the black jellyfish, as shown in this futurist menagerie by Robert Hickson. As you can see here, you have the futurist metaphorical menagerie, which talks about the black elephant. These are events that are extremely likely and widely predicted that are usually ignored by society. Because, of course, the kind of mindset, that the society has. The black swan, this is an event totally outside and way beyond our observations. And the black jellyfish, an example of this, of course, COVID-19, things we think we know and understand, but which turned out to be more complex and uncertain than we expected. So COVID-19 has been there in the map of emerging diseases for the past 30 years, but we somehow ignored it, no? Or somehow we think it will not really, uh, pose a great impact in the society. But you, as we are here in this situation right now, we experience more than 24 months of suffering because of COVID-19. So with that, um, you know, um, 6Ds and the existential risks, we want our preferred feature. And what is that preferred feature? So the feature that we want, of course, is a subject matter that suggests an ideal scenario of communities, of families, living happily. Um, we have this so-called quality of life. We're looking at the well-being and the common good of all Filipino people without problems, without worries, and satisfied with our daily activities. So that is the preferred feature. But we have to consider different areas, different indicators, different or emerging trends for that matter. So how do we create our preferred feature, like to have stable, safe, secured, understandable, predictable, orderly, and within our control? So we have to prepare for it. We have to create our preferred feature. And how are we going to create our preferred feature? Well, in the Philippine bureaucracy, we need professional civil servants whom we consider as forward-looking civil servants, as leaders who have an open mind, who are agile and who are innovative and who are creative for that matter. Because in futures thinking, in having that anticipatory mindset, we need to have the so-called imagination. Having lack of imagination is a sort of sickness in the government. We call it a bureaupathology for that matter. So we need to have imagination. We need to be creative in order for us to prepare for the future. And we need professional civil servants who have a role to play in a future scenario of a prosperous Philippines. So basically, the skills that we need for our professional civil servants are those who can create or who can build scenarios so that we are always prepared for the next coming months, for the next coming years. So the time horizon that we will identify in scenario building is properly laid down. So with that, professionals practice and apply their expertise by not just working in the comfort of their office jobs, not only in the comfort zone, but have to contribute more to knowledge production and sharing, especially those who are into teaching and research. Research is an important component in futures thinking and foresight. So you cannot just do futures thinking and foresight without doing a research. And that will lead to an evidence-based policy making or a sound policy making for that matter. So to prepare our civil servants, we need to have the so-called capacity building on futures thinking and foresight. So it is not just a one-day activity, but it is a continuous activity. It is really about learning by doing. so that we'll be able to consider that as part of our culture. In Singapore, they have two teams in their civil service. One team is in charge with the daily activities, and the other team is in charge with the future. So they're always looking at the next 2 months, in the next 3 years, in the next 4 years. So they have that so-called anticipation. And that is very effective for the Singaporean community. So we would like to introduce the same here in the Philippines. So in short, futures thinking is a set of competencies. And these competencies, once acquired, make professionals attuned to the fast changes, to the acceleration that surround us. So with that, we have the so-called surprise management kit or toolkit with us, as always, in order for us to mitigate any uncertainties. In this slide, as you can see, you have here um, the governance reform framework. And in this governance reform framework, we are looking at the so-called different indicators or different elements. And one, of course, is the changing of mindsets. Changing of mindsets is important. And this was validated by the United Nations. In this report of United Nations, wherein it talks about changing mindsets and governance capacities for policy coherence, um, pointed out that changing mindsets is a strategy towards sustainable development. So, what are these mindsets that we need? One, of course, is anticipatory governance mindset. Second is foresight mindset, agile mindset, ethical mindset, and a lot more. So there are different types of mindsets included in this report and the framework that we introduced together with Professor Marcel and Dr. Alex is included in this report, right? So with that, with this framework, I was inspired to craft also a framework which is entitled Features, Leadership, and Governance Framework. This is somehow a bid for a holistic approach to carving out desirable features. And what are the elements here? So we have features thinking, which I'm discussing now. We have Hiraya foresight, that is about the indigenization of features thinking and foresight. Features thinking is about the discipline, right? And foresight is about the practical application of it. So we need to contextualize when we apply foresight in the Philippines based on our culture, based on our values. Another thing here is knowledge co-creation. Knowledge co-creation is an important thing in innovation. You cannot introduce innovation if you don't have knowledge co-creation. So it's important that we always share insights, perspectives, and we have an open space to discuss both tacit and explicit knowledge. The wrapping mechanism of this is frenetic leadership. So frenetic leadership is about the six abilities of a good leader, or of a wise leader. As you can see, you have there the ability to make judgment based on goodness, the ability to perceive reality as it is using our five senses, the ability to create the bar or a platform wherein we have the same shared context, or the same or shared context, and the ability to articulate the essence into narratives, and the ability to exercise political power. And equally important, of course, the ability to foster finesses. And that is really about the common good. Another thing is about the well-being of the Filipino people. So when we talk about the well-being of the Filipino people, we're talking about our vision as a country. What is our vision as a country? Our vision as a country is to build a just and humane society. And this is anchored on our motto, makadiyos, makatao, makakalikasan at makabansa, and with our Filipino values. So bayanihan, balikatan, malasakit, and among others. Our Constitution, especially our preamble, provides what are the Filipino values, what are the values that we need to promote in the Philippine bureaucracy and in the community as well. So it is stated there. And likewise, I'd like to get your attention on this one. This is important because it talks about sustainable development. It talks about the future generation and talking about the future generation, we have to take good care of this generation in order for the next generation to sustain it. So this is about the principle of intergenerational responsibility. The intergenerational responsibility doctrine was emphasized in the case of Opossa versus Factorian. That is the case about illegal logging. And it talks about the right of minor children who are below 18 years old and who do not have the legal capacity to file a case. It it says there, the Supreme Court rather decided that they have the right, to file a case against illegal loggers by invoking intergenerational responsibility doctrine. So that is the framework is all about. So what is features thinking again? Again, it is a competence or a skill, very helpful to all of us, public managers, public leaders, including development leaders from the private sector. And if we immerse ourselves into futures thinking, it will really contribute towards what? Towards innovation, towards agility, towards sound decision making. That's why we also need to influence our policymakers to delve into futures thinking and foresight. And if we ask questions using futures thinking as a lens, we may ask simple to difficult questions. Simple questions: what are the implications of COVID-19? It's not that simple, right? And what are the possible, the plausible, probable, and preferred features of professional development, for example, because we are talking about civil service, we're talking about the Philippine bureaucracy. So by looking at the possible, plausible, probable, and preferred features, we need to use different tools. So we need to be scientific for this one. And for cities, for example, how will cities look like in the next 18 months, in 5 years, 10, or even 20 years? So, it's now high time. It's really high time to formulate strategies now. We are in a tuna world, full of turbulence, uncertainties. It's about novelty, it's about ambiguity. And with all these existential risks, we need to convert wicked problems into wicked opportunities. And how are we going to do that? Of course, we need to paint in a bigger canvas the so-called art. And that is about being adaptive, being resilient, being transformative. And not only that, equally important in all of these things is to be ethical, for that matter, because being a features thinker, it talks about what? It talks about ethics. It talks about moral values, for that matter. So painting the tuna world into a bigger canvas, which is art, is really all about converting wicked problems into wicked opportunities. So foresight again, our futures thinking, for that matter, as we use them interchangeably, it's not about predicting the future, but rather imagining multiple features in creative ways. That is why in the first few minutes, I mentioned about imagination and creativity, because imagination and creativity is very important. And if we immerse ourselves into this one, it really heightens our ability to sense, shape, and adapt to what happens in the years ahead. And it's time consuming though, but you are looking at different perspective. You're looking at a different feature, for that matter. It's not about copying what have been decided before. So you are trying to provide new solutions to the new problems, not new problems, old solutions, for that matter. And that is very expensive. And immersing with this kind of activity, you are also introducing innovation and agility by not looking at business as usual scenario. So futures thinking is an approach to identifying long-term issues and challenges shaping the future development of a policy area. And you explore their implications for policy development. That's very important. Sometimes we just craft policies, but we don't talk about implications. So in crafting policies, we need to look at the implications as always. But uh, these are some of the gaps. No? One of the gaps, of course, is um, not taking into consideration the implications of a certain policy. You know, future thinking and foresight are handles that really invite different stakeholders in one platform. So it's open. It's about multiple insights. It's about different worldviews. But at the end of the day, you're able to craft your preferred feature by looking at different scenarios. So it brings together key agents of change and various sources. So the question is, why should you embark on a foresight exercise? Well, I mentioned some of the reasons, but there are also some reasons that you need to know, like shifting the focus of senior manager or management dialogue towards the long-term orientation or area. Another, of course, is showing or attaining thought leadership on a given topic. That is very important in an organization. And when you do this, you generate new ideas, you explore innovative ways of responding to policy challenges, not the business as usual, as I mentioned earlier. So in doing that and looking at the probable, the plausible, the preferred features, you need to look at the different tools in foresight and features thinking. So there are a number of tools actually. So as you can see in the slide, you have their emerging issue analysis, the features wheel, shared history, features triangle. You have backcasting, causal layered analysis, and a lot more. So it will really depend on you on what are the tools that you want to use. So you can explore um, a number of tools in only one area that you want to focus on. So one of the examples that you can use is backcasting, and this is about exploring the dynamics of change. And when you do this, you can um, explore driver mapping workshop. And what are you going to do if you are in a driver mapping workshop? Well, first, basically, you have to identify your focal concern, then identify drivers that will affect your focal concern, then make a scenario of your preferred feature. And in doing that, you may look into the different areas by using PESTLE, STEEP, PESTO in clustering your ideas or indicators of change for that matter. And driver mapping is used to identify the political, economic, societal, technological, even legislative and environmental drivers shaping the future policy environment. So this is very useful and practical because you can already cluster the drivers accordingly. No? So like for example, in technology, what are the drivers of change there? So you just have to identify and so on and so forth. So in exploring, you can now proceed to backcasting. And backcasting is an effective way of connecting a given feature to the present and identifying what needs to be done to deliver it. So what are the aims or objectives of backcasting? So basically, first, you have to identify drivers shaping the future. Second, you identify which drivers are most important for the future of the policy area or strategic endeavor, and to distinguish between certain and uncertain outcomes resulting from the action of your drivers like PESTLE, PESTO, VSTEEP, and so on and so forth. So your output will look at a list of your drivers that need to be acted on, drivers that need to be tracked, and drivers that are important for the policy area, but that have an uncertain outcome. And your outcome are agreed priorities for action. right? And this backcasting is good for understanding the dynamics of change, identifying issues that have a high impact on the policy areas. And likewise, as I mentioned earlier, distinguishing between drivers with a certain and uncertain outcome for that matter. So, with that, the participants in this workshop, in this backcasting, work backwards. Later on, I'll show you the diagram or the figure for that matter. Participants work backwards from the future and identify the key steps or events and decisions that will make it happen. One particular focus of backcasting is to identify what lies within the control of the policy and strategy makers and can therefore be delivered. What lies outside their control and therefore needs to be managed. So in this tool, you'll be able to really explore the dynamics of change. So the tool has 6 steps. First, introduce your preferred feature. It's not really required if it was developed by the group. Secondly, identify the key differences between the present and your preferred feature. All right. And third, you build a timeline or your time horizon that sets out the key changes needed to move from the present reality to the preferred future. So your time horizon could be 2050, for example, or 2030 for that matter. So this is the illustration of backcasting. As you can see here, you have to look at the vision of what I want, of what you want for that matter. So you have to begin with the end in mind, and that is 2050, for example. That's your time horizon. Then you have to move backwards from the vision to the present, then move step by step towards the vision. So an example of this is the sustainability of the planet, society, and people, and of the Obashi group. So in 2050, their vision is sustainability of the planet, society, and people. And what are their targets in 2040? So you have to backcast. And then go to 2030, your targets, you have your sustainable development goals, then the present conditions. You have to outline that, you have to enumerate. And then now you go back with your action plan from the present conditions to your targets for 2030 to 40. And then you will, of course, attain your vision for 2050. So there you go. So that's an example, one example of backcasting made by Obayashi Group for the planet, society, and people's sustainability. Another helpful tip is, of course, is to look at the global risks report. I don't know if we already have the 2020, but based on the 2021 global risks report, you have the top risks by likelihood and by impact. So here, as you can see, you have extreme weather, you have climate action failure. For top risks by impact, the infectious diseases, of course. Then you also have your climate action failure, weapons of mass destruction, and you have number 10 here, livelihood crisis for the likelihood, and the high by impact, you have IT infrastructure breakdown. So we have to be ready for that as well. So how do you do backcasting? Well, basically, it will depend. No? So we can have a breakout room for 6 groups, 5. It will depend on the number of co-learners inside the classroom. Then you are given at least 1.5 hours to do the workshop in a online setting. Then you have 30 minutes for preliminaries and closing, 40 minutes for small team discussion, and 20 minutes for plenary sharing. So your sharing of outputs is really about you know assigning someone, no? So you need to have a lead discussant, or all of you can share, no, to share your output, no, or your preferred feature for that matter. So that is all about a backcasting, looking at your preferred feature. So what are the benefits in doing all of these things? So as professional civil servants, we'll be able to identify emerging issues. that's important. No, we need to do that. We should not have a mindset of bahala na, no, bahala na system. We need to be anticipatory. We need to be creative. We need to be imaginative in order for us to negotiate uncertainties, articulate scenarios, not the business as usual, but what are the alternatives for that matter, develop a common vision of the desired future, introduce innovation, and of course, design robust policies and strategies, right? Often despite limited resources and in a given complex environment. So these are the benefits. And when we indigenize that, we have to look at our values. We have to look at our environment context for that matter is very important. The ecology where we are operating, where we are living for that matter. And in in contextualizing or indigenizing features, we are looking at the so-called hiraya. No? Why hiraya? Hiraya foresight. No? Well, because it's for us, it's an appropriate word to describe our future, no? Our kinabukasan or our tomorrow. So it's an ancient word, and for us, it glows and red shades. Now, some of our students here really love the word hiraya, no, and some of you name your your babies or your children hiraya, no? So it's very interesting because it glows and red shades really. So it subsumes a lot of unexpressed meaning significances and meaning implications, and we can do this by really engaging in current trends, being catalyst of change, being an effective communicator, but as I mentioned many times, ethical, morally upright, and socially responsible. We need to take care of our community. We need to take care of our organization. We work for the institution for that matter. Then our ability to change the norm versus the new norm. No? So you have there a lot of areas to consider. But of course, future thinking and foresight looks at look at evidence-based policy making. So again, you have to take a look at the policy side always. No? So looking at the policy side by not forgetting the so-called people and technology. So this is a nexus of policy, people, and technology. And when you look at people, knowledge sharing and empowerment, discipline and individual responsibility, community engagement are key areas. For technology, of course, AI, robotics, nanotechnology, and so on and so forth. In Japan, they have the so-called Society 5.0, and they are looking at an agile governance and agile community. So policy, we are now embedding futures thinking and foresight in policy and planning. This is a course that we will open very soon. I think in June, first week of June. The title is Certificate Course on Foresight and Futures Thinking. So why foresight and futures thinking and not futures thinking alone? Because foresight is about operationalization, and the uh, the basic concept there is how are we going to embed futures thinking and foresight in policy and planning. So it's very timely again because we have a new set of local and national leaders, and we would like them to embrace futures thinking and foresight in planning. Right? So there are 5 R's to remember. First, we need to rethink, reframe, retool, reskill, and re-energize if we do foresight and futures thinking in policy and planning. It's really about revisiting the system, revisiting the structure, the organization, the policies for that matter, and the people likewise. So re-energizing, it's about the team working on bringing areas of concerns where foresight and futures thinking can be applied. So again, imagination is the currency of the future, and through imagination, we'll be able to map and gather intelligence to design your preferred feature. And what is that preferred feature? So our preferred feature, of course, is that we need to have sustainable development, and to have that, we need to work today, right? We need to work today in order to create sustainable results today for tomorrow. And that is really all about intergenerational fairness. And this intergenerational fairness will lead us to sustainable development, the true development or genuine development that we want for everybody. So again, there are a number of advantages on in doing foresight. So as you can see here, you have better anticipation, policy innovation, future proofing, and stress testing. Okay, sorry for the interruption. So as I mentioned, these are the advantages in doing foresight. And in looking at the advantages, we have to look at also what is it and isn't not. No? So foresight is not a universal cure to all planning ills. So meaning to say, it's not a solution to everything. It is just one of the tools that we are using. It's just one of the handles, but we are looking at it as a refreshing, no, a refreshing tool and an inspiring tool for all of us. And oftentimes we forgot to embed future thinking and foresight in policy and planning. That is why there are so many gaps in the implementation side, because we're not able to begin in a way that we should be anticipatory, no, and we should look at the long term orientation or at the long term area of policy and planning. So there are three P's, no, in foresight. It's being perspective, of course. You gather genuine information, knowledge and information, then it is policy related. So we are always emphasizing that in policy making, we always have to integrate foresight and futures thinking. So again, these are also the advantages of foresight. It enhances when it comes to policy and planning your methods by really looking at a broader horizon for that matter, by enabling development, innovation, and transformative efforts in an uncertain and unpredictable reality, by opening up space for other stakeholders. And that is really all about open space. So there are a number of skill sets and competencies required to be features ready. So a lot. There are nine as stated in the slide, but if I have to cluster them, there are, for me, no, aside from future thinking, future foresight, ethical leadership, and design thinking, there are only two for me to cluster all of these, and that is being frenetic and futurist. So if you are frenetic, you are looking at goodness. You are always looking at the common good and the well-being of the Filipino people. And being a futurist, meaning to say that you are ethical and you are forward-looking and anticipatory for that matter. So these are two important skill sets and competencies that requires us to be features ready, being frenetic and being a futurist. So in the Philippines right now, we are introducing foresight and futures thinking first by way of democratizing it. So for the past 24 months, we've been co-creating knowledge with the different sectors, and hopefully in the new administration, we'll be able to continue by deepening futures thinking through institutionalization. And that institutionalization will really look at different government agencies with different features thinking laboratories. And of course, towards the end, we'll be able to harvest our preferred feature or the features that we want for the country, for our society, and for our organization. So with that, I'd like to conclude that how are we going to operationalize futures thinking is really by cultivating FFT, cultivating foresight and futures thinking in our daily activities. Make it a culture. You know? Start small. We cannot shortcut the future. We have to start with 101, then later institutionalize through intense cooperative, collaborative education and training programs. And with that, after having soft skills, you'll be able to create a central unit, a national institute for that matter, and use indigenous concepts like bayanihan, hiraya, and among others. There are a lot actually, if you will just discover what are these local concepts or indigenous concepts. There's always power, no, in so-called local wisdom for that matter. So again, with futures thinking and foresight as handles towards sustainable development, we need to democratize that. And in democratizing it, we need to tap our own local knowledge and wisdom. That is why Hiraya Foresight becomes a suitable indigenous base of futures thinking. So I would like to end here, and later on, I will entertain some questions from your side. So thank you so much, Hiraya Manawari.